Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, which Craig Touch and myself chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and publishing. And today we're delighted to welcome a very special guest from a part of the world I'm extremely familiar with, Mr. Mark Wilson, an author and scientist. And are you actually in Oxford in the UK right now? It must be quite late there.
No, I'm not. I'm in Washington, DC.
Oh, well, there we go. It's not even drinks time yet.
Not yet.
So there we go. Two Brits, both on the wrong side of the channel. So Mark, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we wouldn't be here without them. We wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Roland. And thanks again for joining us, Mark. I know that you're a scientist and, you turned writer, which is, I'm sure a journey in itself. So we want to talk a bit about that journey and how, the writing process that goes into building a good science fiction story, the sort of things that you have to consider and how you're coming to it from your angle as a scientist and somebody who hasn't really written anything before. But your first book, it's like, you've taken on a pretty ambitious sort of thing, time travel, which is always like, I love science fiction. I love, time travel stuff, but I always kind of like get caught up in the weeds of the paradoxes, all this stuff that it's so hard to get caught to do, right? Yeah. So I'd love to sort of hear your perspective on all of that as well. So why don't we start off by, you giving us a sort of quick bio of yourself and how you got to this point of scientist turned writer.
So I've been a scientist in the biopharmaceutical industry for probably 36 years now. I always had an artistic side to me. I've written music, I've done watercolor painting, and I've always had an idea that I'd like to write a book. It was a very different kind of book than the one I've written now. But yeah, I've always had the idea of being able to write and wanting to be creative in that way. And obviously, there's a lot of inspiration has gone into this particular book. I mean, the Dirk Gently novels by were a big influence on me. A couple of my favorite books ever. So, there's a lot of different influences. And I love time travel. Back to the Future is one of my favorite movies. So
I've got the DeLorean right back there.
I think the idea of writing a book about a time traveling detective wasn't a big leap for me. It was a subject that has been kind of at the back of my mind for a long time. So just needed the spark to make me actually do it.
Oh, well, you had me at Douglas Adams. As soon as you mentioned that, I'm like, oh yes, there we go. Mm-hmm. Those are the books that got me into reading in the first place.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Hitchhiker's Guide. I mean, when I was young, I don't even remember. Probably a teenager is when I read that one.
Yeah. Same for me.
Yeah. So how come you decided to? I guess like with your background as in science and not in writing necessarily, was there ever that sort of thought process of whether you'd want to write more of a a science kind of textbook or like more of like a factual book, or was it always just you just really wanted to do something fictional?
Always really fiction, but I have the idea that it might be fun to be able to write about science, making something very complicated accessible for people. But no, I think my main ambition was always to write fiction.
And mysteries too, to combine those two. Mysteries is always, I've never written a mystery myself, although I've been sort of toying with an idea lately, but I watch a lot of mysteries like on television, and it's always it seems like for me, and because I haven't really read a lot or really even read a lot about the writing process of mystery, in my head I'm always kind of like, it would probably make most sense to write a mystery starting backwards. Like you figure out like who did it, why they did it, the steps that they took, and then it's easier to flow forwards after that.
I think that's true for me as well. I kind of knew what the plot was going to be, and then it was working backwards to make that more complicated and more, well, not completely transparent. You know, you maybe can get what's coming, but you want to weave in different things that take the plot in different directions. And so, yeah, working backwards from the fundamental plot and then creating a good story out of that was a big part of the process for me. I had an enormous piece of graph paper. You might expect a scientist to use graph paper, but yeah, I had an enormous pad of graph paper that I had the timeline plotted out, and the number of times I redrew it and drew it again. It was just, it was a real process before I even started typing.
Well, I'm dying to ask on that, because there are different schools of thought about time travel as a whole, aren't there? So there's like the Back to the Future, where you can create a branching timeline, and there are some where it's all predestined and whatever you do in the past doesn't matter. So as a scientist, you must have come into it with a vision for what time travel was in your universe.
Yeah. So for me, at least, the way I've written the book is that my detective is called Phil Beans, and when Phil goes back in the past, he can change things, and when he gets back to his own time, the intervening period is different for everyone else but him. He has not lived that time, he skipped it, and so what version he lived through is still his reality, so he has to then try and work out what's different and what's changed. And that, I think, is a big part of how the plot works. You know, Phil makes a change in the past, and then he doesn't know what's happened until he goes back to his own time.
Without sounding crazy to everybody else.
Yes, he's obviously very careful not to let on what he does and doesn't know. Yeah.
Be like, I killed Hitler, and people be like, who's Hitler?
That's right.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Great job. That's an interesting thing. I think for a mystery too, it makes it a little easier maybe to make the plot more convoluted and not as straight path and not as obvious about who the killer is, when you have that ability to introduce time travel into it. So you can change realities and do all this stuff that could throw people for a loop every time, right?
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I think it's a great idea to merge the two of them.
Now, it must have been a lot more difficult to organize a plot, though, because normally you have cause and effect, and you have a plot that works in that kind of thing. I mean, did you create your plot and then go back and sort of chop it and change it? How does that whole process work?
There were a lot of tweaks to the timeline and where Phil was at any point in time. Because at one point I'd written a chapter where he was somewhere that he shouldn't be. So I had to completely rewrite the chapter so that he was somewhere else entirely, because it's like, oh no, he can't be there, because otherwise he'd meet himself. I've double booked him, so I had to have him somewhere else. So yeah, you do have to be very careful. You have to keep track, and that's what the graph paper was for. I had locations and dates and different timelines and who was where, and had to keep really good track of who was where and when.
That is one of those aspects of time travel that you see dealt with in different ways in different stories. So what was your sort of rules around going back into a timeline that you already existed, and what would happen if you met yourself, or can you not?
So the approach I took there was that when Phil goes back in time, his current self is living. It's like if you traveled to France, you would be in France. He travels back in time, so he now exists in that time, but his old self is already there. So he obviously has to try and avoid his old self, and then
his younger self.
His younger self, yes. Yeah. His previous self, his younger self. Yeah, that's right.
But what would happen if he met his?
Well, one of the slightly comedic moments is when I describe how Phil bumped into himself when he when he first managed that without really thinking about it, and it was just really awkward for him standing there like he should shake hands with himself. It's like, oh, I'm Phil, you know, it's like really, really awkward. You know, like when you don't like your own voice or you don't like seeing yourself on video.
Oh God,
like that, only much worse.
You're giving me secondhand anxiety just imagining that.
Yeah.
So coming from, you know, a background of not writing, how did you, you know, figure out the process? Was it just trial and error, or did you, you know, start reading up on how to?
Yeah, I guess the easy bit for me was the plot. I treated that like a scientist, you know, with the graph paper, working out what the plot was. Then when it came to the writing, you know, obviously I quite fancied myself as someone who could write some nice descriptive prose, and you know, I'd sit down and I'd write a description of a place or, you know, a person. But then when you get into it and you've drafted a story, and then someone else reads it and they start telling you little things that a scientist doesn't necessarily think of. It's like, you can't give us all the backstory at the beginning because we don't care about your character. You can only give us backstory when we care. I'm like, oh, doesn't the backstory help you care? It's like, no. Got to give me someone I've already fallen in love with before I care where they came from. It's like, oh, so the whole thing had to be rewritten from that point of view.
That's really interesting.
I put all the backstory in at the beginning because I thought you needed that to know who Phil was and what he was doing, and actually know. It helps to build some of the suspense to not really know how he got where he was, how he got to time travel in the first place. You don't find that out till much later in the book.
I've heard that that's often a challenge that science fiction authors in particular face. Is like they do so much world building and it's kind of like slow down. You know, people in Star Wars don't want to have like the history of droids introduced to them before R2-D2 comes on. So that's interesting. That's a challenge you faced and overcame.
Yeah. So my thought process putting the book together in the first place was, you know, flawed to begin with. So it took a lot of help from, you know, professional, you know, people that are authors or people that know what they're doing to help me figure out how the book needed to be structured. So that was an important.
Did somebody give you that tip after reading it? Is that what?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So I paid people to critique the book.
Okay, yeah, like beta readers. Yeah.
4 different times I got people to critique the book.
That's great. I mean, that's what you should do.
And each time the number of comments got fewer.
That's what you want.
And that got me to the point where I thought, okay, we might be onto something now.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because there's some things that are, you know, that make a lot of sense, but you don't necessarily hear them as rules. And I think that's one that, you know, when you say it, and I started thinking about it, like I've never heard anyone sort of say that, like don't give backstory to a character that you don't care about yet, you know, whatever. And then I started thinking about it, and I'm like, you know, a lot of times when you're reading a book or watching a show, you know, you're seeing all the action, you're seeing all these things happen, and then often it's like way later when they sort of say, oh, this is why he's like this, right? Yeah. And they go and explain it, and it's like, I never really, you know, I always actually, I think what I would think about it is like, oh, they decided to just tell us finally, but maybe it was more you know, they intentional than I, you know, oh, they needed some filler here, so they decided to go into how he became this person. But really it's like more that, yeah, now the characters are invested in that person, they want to know, and it would slow the story down too to put all that at the beginning. So
yeah, and that's quite deliberate. In the end, the backstory comes at a point just before we get to the climax, so it really slows the story back down. And then you get to learn some of the backstory, and that then builds back up to the climax of the book.
I was just thinking of my favorite time travel films and books, and that's part of the experience, isn't it? It's like, it's a very rewarding thing to read one of these books, and when you learn something in the future that affects the past, you get like a dopamine rush.
Yeah.
It's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together.
Yeah, it is. So one other thing that I learned, advice that I was given by one of the folks that critiqued the book for me, was something that it had not even occurred to me would be a rule, was how in any given chapter, if you're writing the book in close third person, I'm writing, say, a chapter from Phil's point of view. We see what he does, we see what other people do, but we also know what Phil's thinking. It's like Phil thought such and such. What you can't then do is say what the other person was thinking. You can't be going from one person's thoughts to another. You have to stay in one person's head. Otherwise, they call it head hopping, apparently.
Yeah, that's another issue that a lot of writers have.
Super confusing for the reader. Obviously, when you're writing it and you want to convey what the other person thought of Phil, it's easy. You just put, so-and-so thought this and that. But that's a rule. And that caused another big rewrite. I had to go through the whole thing and change up so much of what I'd written.
I think isn't that a different point of view that some people write with, like omnipresent or something like that, point of view?
Yes. So if it's omnipresent, then you have to be much further removed from people to be able to describe kind of dispassionately what everybody's thinking and feeling. But if you're really very close to one character, you can't then switch in and out of that.
Right. And I mean, it makes sense. And I think in a lot of ways it helps the writing process, because you don't always want the reader to know what the thoughts are of that person, because your main character doesn't know them, right? So you want him to react to them.
Yeah.
So you sometimes want to keep some mystery alive, right? If you know what everyone's thinking, there's no mystery anywhere.
But if you need to convey what the other person thought, you have to describe their reaction or their expression or something, so that you can then infer from that.
Right. And which is that's the whole show don't tell thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was a big thing for me to learn.
That's an important thing. And I mean, it's almost when I prefer to write in first person most of the time, but I do write in third person as well. But I find in third person, I really like the closeness that you get with the character, and you're hearing all of his thoughts, and even in between when other people are talking, he's thinking about things, whatever. But the challenge there is, especially if you're writing, let's say, a mystery, or you're trying to keep a secret that he knows from the reader. That's where the challenge is for me. It's like, he knows it, why wouldn't he be thinking about it? But you don't want the reader to know it yet, so you have to be really careful.
A lot of the time in this book, Phil's thoughts are about what's happening, what he's done, what he's changed. So it's quite a good vehicle to be able to understand what's going on in the stories, because he's thinking it through. So there's a good reason to be in Phil's head sometimes.
Does he have a notepad?
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Does he have a notepad?
No, he doesn't.
I was going to say, I'd be like, oh, I'll remember all of this. It'll be fine. And then I could imagine get myself into all sorts of trouble.
Yeah, no, he does not have a notepad.
So yeah, those are very key things with the writing process. Were these friends of yours that you had, or like professional beta readers, or
they're professional beta readers? Yeah, I got in touch with them through Write by Night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good, like, to be able to get really good feedback from your readers, because often, especially a lot of first-time authors tend to ask their friends or their family, and then you don't really get. Not only do you not get sort of like the professional feedback of somebody who really understands, story and read a lot and whatever, but you also kind of get the, oh, it's great, like, they don't want to say anything bad about it. They don't want to hurt your feelings, right? But strangers,
right? Yeah, that is true. I mean, I did ask people to read the book that I thought I would get real feedback from. One of my colleagues read the book, and she told me she laughed out loud in a few places, which, you know, obviously made me
That's
feel
a good sign.
I must be onto something.
As long as you meant it to be funny. Otherwise, you know.
Yeah.
I really love that death scene. It's like, really? It was supposed to be very tearjerker. I was laughing the whole time.
My daughter also read the book, and she read a fairly early draft, I think. She said she got to a certain point in the book when you learn how badly Phil has messed up the timeline. And she said she stayed up all night, finished the book because she wanted to know what happened. So I thought,
oh, that's great.
That's good. Yeah.
that's good feedback.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I always sort of like fear, like you said, she read an early version of it, or is that what you said?
Yeah, it was a relatively early draft.
So then did you want her to read like the final version as well?
No, I think I wanted her to get the final version at the end. You know,
but I mean, like you had given her an early version, right? So then my fear always with having somebody read my stuff, somebody I know read my stuff, well, when it's not done, is they'll go and they'll read it, and then I'll maybe make significant changes like you did. And then I'll, you know, I feel awkward saying, hey, can you read it again? And it's like, it's largely the same thing. And then, but I, you know, I don't want to make them read it twice. So it's like, you gave her an early version. Now, would you say, like, when it's done, would you say, hey, read it again, here's the final version, or just
well, she is reading the book.
So
now.
She's reading it again.
She's probably finished it by now, but
yeah, that's what I always feel bad about, like trying to get somebody to read something a second time. I don't even like reading my own stuff over and over again. I get bored. It's just like somebody else is gonna have to read it twice. And, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's one of the funny things with trying to proofread the final version, was you're supposed to be looking for, you know, missing periods or missing quote marks and whatever, and I just found myself rereading it again. And you know, thinking, oh, now I've got to go back and look more carefully because I was just reading.
Do you know, one of the things that gave me such validation was when somebody said to me, you can't really proofread your own work as an author, you have to get someone else to do it. And I'm like, oh, because I was always terrible at it, because I was never good at like this. So
well, you see what you,
I think
you
4
see
of
what
us
you meant
proofread the book. So
well, I mean, you see what you meant to write, not what you did write sometimes.
Exactly. Yes, that's very easy to fall into that trap.
So have you had any feedback from other, let's say, scientists? Did you ask any sort of people to fact checked, you know, and not that you can fact check time travel, right? It doesn't exist, but at least, does this make sense? You know, like I love science fiction, but I've never written a real, you know, science fiction story because I don't know enough science that I feel like if I tried, I'd have a lot of people complaining about my science. But as a scientist, you probably have a better footing on that. But at the same time, you know, you still want to maybe ask other people, hey, you know, does this at least seem plausible?
I think the main thing for me was that anybody who's not a scientist would find it easy to follow. That was the thing for me, not necessarily to get the science fact checked, but to make sure that you could follow what was going on, where Phil was and why he was there. And I did get good feedback for that.
Because I guess you don't pick up a science fiction book to read a science textbook. You read one for a story.
You read it to have a little bit of fantasy in the plot.
Although there is that sort of genre of hard science fiction where they are sort of really going deep in the weeds, versus I would definitely not read that. I tried reading, I think, one of those when I was younger, and you know, I was like, I want to read the hard stuff where it really makes, you know, really goes into the explanation of all these things, and I find that was harder to read. You know, as a
it sounds like more hard work to write.
I'm sure it was.
No, this was really good fun to write. It was really you know, trying to make something a little bit fun, a little bit silly, putting some humor in there. The sci-fi element is relatively light, I think.
And I mean, your whole package is really nicely put together. Gosh, I don't think I've ever said that to another man. Your cover and your blurb and everything. And I mean, it appeals to me, even the name Phil Beans. Like maybe it's just because I'm British, but I'm like, oh, I like that. And then, you know, it's set in Oxford, and Britain has such a wonderful legacy of like irreverent, funny science fiction, from Red Dwarf to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy to everything. So yeah, how did you, as somebody who is not a writer and a publisher by trade and got into this, how did you get all of these elements right?
I think by not trying too hard. I think
so that's my mistake.
I think I started out not imagining that I was actually going to publish this, because I previously wrote a book just because it was something that I wanted to do since I was 15. I wrote, I think it was about 90,000 words, quite a convoluted story in a made up land with its own language, and it was just something that I'd been working on very sporadically for, you know, decades. And when that was done, I kind of had the bug that I never even thought that I was going to publish this. I just really wanted to write a story that was fun, write something that I thought would be kind of fun to find on the bookshelf myself. And I think when I'd got enough people to read it and then got it critiqued and had people tell me that, yeah, actually, this is really quite good, that I actually thought seriously about taking it further. So I think when I started out, I wasn't really trying to make something that would be popular. I just wrote what I'd quite like to write. So I think, you know, you can be a little bit freer with the humor. You can be a little bit freer with, you know, the writing style, but without worrying too much what anybody else is going to make of it.
I've heard that's very good advice. I mean, my first bestseller that I ever wrote, it was the most debauched thing that I ever wrote, and I was like, oh, no one's ever going to read this. It doesn't matter what I write. So I just went, you know, full bore craziness into it, and it ended up being the first book that like made me successful. So I think writing the book that you want to write without censoring yourself or worrying about writing for an audience can be a really effective way to approach things.
Yeah, I think that's the way I approach this.
And did you go with a publisher, or did you self-publish this?
So I think it's a hybrid publisher, but it's, yes, Redwood Digital Publishing is who I'm published through, and they were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. You know, I worked with Sarah primarily. She works with the editor and the designer for the cover and the, you know, getting the text in the ebook and whatever, you know, formatting all the fonts. So I got a lot of creative input, a lot of creative control, and you know, designing the cover was a real team effort. I did the artwork for it, and then you know, the publishers, the designer reorganized the elements and made it into a cover that stood out really well.
So there I was telling you how nice your package was, but it's Sarah and the folks at Redwood we should be.
They did a fantastic job. Yeah, it really was a team effort getting that done.
So how does their process work? Is it, you know, they take everything on and do it, and then, you know, put it up on Amazon for you and give you and pay you out based on that? But you don't have to pay anything up front, right? Or
yes, I had to pay up front.
You did, okay.
They then do not take any royalties after that.
Oh, I see. Okay, so then you're getting the full amount from Amazon.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I can't imagine I'm ever actually going to make back what I've spent on getting the book this far. But
yeah, you never know, right? It's hard to. It's hard when you only have one book, too, right? Yeah. You know, we find that the 3 or 4 books in, everyone gets easier, and especially if it's a book that is well liked. If you have multiple books, then people can discover you from 3 or 4 points of discovery, and then go back and read those prior ones. So
Yeah,
and these days, you
oh,
you've got to
yeah.
advertise and market. Do they do any marketing or advertising for you? Have you been? Is that on your own? You got to figure that out.
Well, there are other people that are working on marketing and advertising.
The more books, the better. That's why Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy trilogy had 5 books in it.
Yes. Yeah.
So will Phil Beans return?
He will, absolutely. If I live long enough, yes. I'm planning a trilogy at least. We have to see if I come up with any more ideas, but I've got ideas for 2 more books.
Is it sort of the same sort of time travel mystery?
Yes, yeah, it will carry on from where Full of Beans leaves off.
Right.
You know, his relationship with Holly. You know, we'll get into more about Phil's dad. We'll get into more about various different characters in the book, and of course, his nemesis will come back.
Right.
I was going to say, is his nemesis a time traveler as well?
No, Phil's the only one who can time travel. But the fun thing is, when you can time travel, your nemesis is still alive in the past. So we can always play with that.
Okay, so then what other sort of, you know, things have you learned along the way in this process? Because, you know, every author tends to well, we all have different experiences on what we do, right? And we all take different lessons from what we've done, and often sharing those out help other authors when they encounter those same things. But we even when we do encounter the same things, sometimes it's different enough that it's a whole different problem for us, even though other people have had it, and those solutions don't always, you know, always work for us. But, you know, are there key things that you've learned during this process?
Well, I think for me, a big part of this was trying to balance writing the book with a full-time job. And there was a big part of not procrastinating and being very determined to use my spare time to get something done. So you don't have the time to just sit and ponder, you know. It's like you have to try and get something done. So I think one of the things that I learned was, if I don't know what's next, I just have to write something. So it really was a question of writing a description of a scene that I knew I was going to write, I was going to have in the future in the book. Maybe not the next bit, but at some point I knew something was going to happen, or a place there was going to be, or somewhere that I just knew I wanted to incorporate into the book somewhere. So I would just write about that, just try and do something, write about someone or a character, or, you know, something that was going to happen, and try and get something written that I could use later, even if I didn't know what to write next.
So it didn't necessarily follow straight on from what you'd previously been writing?
No, and I would just save it somewhere and come back to it and edit it, and then figure out where is it going to fit in the book, you know, when do I get to that bit. But at least I've written something. I haven't wasted a whole weekend. You know, I've spent at least a few hours writing something. So yeah, it was a real you know, learning to sort of structure your free time and make sure that you're not just losing a whole weekend because you're not sure what to do next.
Yeah, I've experienced that.
Sometimes just writing for the sake of writing, even if you
to some extent, plan,
it's a good skill to. It's one of those things, you know, where it's 10,000 hours or whatever, you know, even if you're not going to end up using it, just writing something will help.
It's also good practice for writing what you do end up using. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You can keep a little file of all those little snippets, and one day you need some ideas, you just go to that. Oh my God, how many of those?
Yeah. So it might be sitting at my laptop. It might just be using the notes app on my phone. If an idea came to me at any point, it'd be, you know, just write it down before I forget it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of authors do that. And then have you found, so I mean, when you decided to publish it, you know, you'd said originally that you weren't even sure you were going to at first, right? So once you had those people, and I assume, you know, when you were going through that process, that was before you had found the publisher, right?
Yeah.
So how, you know, did somebody tell you to use, you know, Redwood? Did you do some research? Did you look into sort of doing it on your own and decide not to for some reason? Or
I think, I'll be honest, with a full-time job, there isn't any way I could have done this on my own. I know that now. I think I had a very good idea that I didn't know what to do, and finding out and doing that would be more than I could manage on my own. So I don't think there was ever really any idea that I could just publish a book without knowing what I was doing or necessarily having the time to invest. But no, I had somebody read the book through Write by Night. My publicist he's called Joe. Joe read the book for me, and I really wanted a input from someone not on the writing side, but more on the, how is this book going to come across? You know, what needs to change really about the book to make it something somebody would want to read. And the fun thing was, Joe said, "You're going to be really annoyed with me because I don't have much to say." And I said, "No, the happier you are, the happier I am." And he said, "The one thing that needs to change is I'm on page 30 and Phil hasn't time traveled yet." So right at the last hurdle, it was like I had to rethink the beginning of the book. But yeah, apart from that, Joe said, "No, it's really good. I like it. I like the humor. I like this, that, and the other." And I said, "Okay, so have you got any advice for me on how I might get this published?" And he said, "Oh, I know a publisher who would want to work with this." And he just put me in touch with Sarah, and Sarah liked the book, and she said she would work with me to get it published. So it was just luck, really, that I got in touch with somebody who knew a publisher that would want to work with me. So,
and that's not easy to do. You have to have a solid product, even with hybrid publishing.
Oh yeah. No, she made it very clear that before she read it, she made it very clear that she was going to take a look, but you know, they didn't just publish anything. So yeah, and then a couple of days later, she got back in touch to say, "Yeah, I really like it."
Yeah, and it's good to hear about publishing companies that do what they say they're going to do, that others are happy with, because we have had a number of episodes recently where we've basically talked about specific, you know, companies that have screwed over their authors, and you know.
Yeah, I did hear some horror stories from people that happens, and so yeah, I was naturally nervous, but you know, if you know somebody who knows the publisher, then you kind of think, well, at least it's not just picking one out of the phone book.
Right.
Yes.
How long did the process take from when, you know, you sent Sarah your book to when it was published?
I think it was back in May when we started the process. So I think we got the final version in June, and then everything got uploaded to Amazon the end of August, beginning of September.
Yeah, that's not too bad. I mean, that's, you know, one of the problems with the traditional publishing is how long it takes. Authors always, you know, complain, you know, it'd be a year or more before, you know, your book sees the light of day. But you had already done a lot of the work. I mean, when you gave it to them, did they have to do anything other than sort of put the cover on it and format it, or did they do editing as well? Or?
They did editing. I will tell you that the guy that edited the book, his name is Kevin. I give him a big shout out because he was amazing. He fact checked everything in that book. Phil drives an old 1963 Ford Zephyr. And he goes to sleep in the front of the car. And Kevin had Googled, and he said, "I think it's worth you explaining that the front of the car is a bench seat and that Phil is comfortable. He's lying down. He's got, you know, I think his sleeping arrangements are worth going into. And I was like, you Googled that? He Googled everything. He checked everything that I put in there that was supposed to be true. And he checked whether the right name for the shopping centre in Oxford, to make sure that the first time we referred to it, we actually gave it its proper name. Everything. It was an absolutely incredible job. He didn't just read it and check for spelling mistakes. He fact checked me.
That's great.
That's fantastic. That's like, you know, most editors would be like, that's not my job. Yeah.
Yep. It was fun. And then going back through all his comments was just really just good fun. You know, we went back and forwards on a couple of things, but yeah, that was really good. And then a couple of people proofread beyond that, make sure that we caught all the errors, and my sister's since read it and found a couple more. she's a smart cookie, and nothing gets past my sister. So yeah, we've got some edits to do. Upload.
So does your agreement with them mean that they'll automatically sort of take the future books, or is that like
no?
Every time?
I think if my next book is rubbish, they will probably say no thank you, but hopefully the next one will be good enough. But yeah, I'm hoping that they will work with me again.
Yeah, but they're not doing any marketing or promoting it.
No. I have a promo going on right now. It'll probably be over by the time this airs, but there's a promo going on Amazon where it's on Kindle for free,
right.
And there's a big sort of media push. The idea there is you get a lot of people to download the book for free, then people read it, and you know, they rate the book and give you reviews, and if the book's any good, then hopefully that helps other people find the book. But I also have Joe. Joe is my publicist. Joe organised this for me, so he's out there getting me involved in interviews and podcasts.
Now we're approaching the top of the hour. So before we go, I have a question I want to ask you, which is, which are your favorite pieces of time traveling media? You mentioned Back to the Future, but I mean, as a book goes, I loved The Time Traveler's Wife. I thought that was a really great book, and it covered time travel really well, I thought. I was wondering if there's anything else that you've read or that you've watched that you really think got time traveling right. Bill and Ted is a good answer.
I actually really quite enjoyed Rob Hart's The Paradox Hotel. That's got a very clever time travel element to it. It is confusing because they can time travel, and when people time travel too much, they become unstuck, so they then start slipping without meaning to in time, and they start being able to see things in the future. And I thought that was a brilliant idea. So yeah, that's a good one. That's a very different take on time travel, I think.
I kind of like it when they bring in extra elements like that.
Yeah, that was new for me. The idea of time travel, like Phil does, you just go somewhere, you see things, and you come back. But that one was really quite clever. A completely different element I've not come across before.
And now movies. Which is your favorite time travel movie that's not Back to the Future, which is the best one?
That's not Back to the Future 2. 12 Monkeys is good. I think Looper is also very good.
Solid choices. Solid recommendations. Now it looks like we are approaching the top of the hour. So Craig, did you have any final questions for Mark?
No, I mean, like, this is, like I said, it's always fascinating to talk to authors about their own personal writing experience, because every one of them is different, and it is really useful to hear about some of the things that you learn along the way, because like I said, like even that idea that, you know, there's a reason why, and I never really thought about it, about why we, for me, it was always, you know, it's the pacing more than anything, is to not put the, you know, the backstory of every character right away. But I agree that a better reason is the idea that you want people to care about those characters first. And that makes a lot of sense. So, you know, I learned something in these things too. So thanks for coming on and enlightening us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, before we go, we've got something very important to do, which is, where can people find out about Phil Beans and his time traveling adventures?
So the book's available on Amazon. I have a website, an author website, markjwilson.com. If you go on there, there's a page, Full of Beans page, that has a lot of pictures and information about the book. You can find a list of characters, and you can even click through to their own websites. The pub and the vegan cafe have their own website. The college that Phil is an alumni of has its own website. So there's some fun to be had, I think, on the website. And if you want to read more about things I think about, I have a Substack page.
Good for you.
At Mark J. Wilson Author.
Fantastic.
Facebook and Instagram as well, and the same, Mark J. Wilson Author.
Well, we will pop a link. We'll pop a link for definite down in the description of this video. So for those of you listening or watching on YouTube, if you want to find out about Phil Beans or subscribe to Mark's Substack or visit him on Facebook or go to Twitter or anything, you'll be able to find all of that on his website. So make sure you scroll down there and click on that link. And as you scroll, you'll pass that big empty comment box. So why don't you do us a favor and let Mark know how much you appreciated everything he shared with us today by leaving a comment. And there's also, if you haven't already, that subscribe button. There's that like button, which you should give a smash, as the kids say. And there is a bell icon that you can click to make sure you get notified every time there is a brand new episode of Fully Booked, which of course there will be next week. So until then, cheerio.